Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Cato, and I am part of the Skoll Foundation team. I'm excited to welcome you to this Skoll World Forum session, Gender, Race, and Systems in American Politics. This year, our forum theme is Closing the Distance, so we thought there was no better way to reflect that theme than to invite our global network to design and build a new kind of event together. There are a few things to note before we begin. The session is being recorded and we will release the footage publicly after the event. Please do feel free to use the chat to engage with each other and ask questions of the speakers. After the session, we'd appreciate if you could take a single question survey that will be in the poll tab just to the right of the video screen. And lastly, we are using the hashtag SkollWF on social media and would love for you to do the same. So we are so thrilled to be able to include this session in this year's virtual Skoll World Forum and want to extend a special thank you to Vote Run Lead for proposing and designing it. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Erin to kick off the session.
Thank you, Nicole. Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Velarde, and I'm the founder of Vote Run Lead. And you are in for an amazing conversation with women on the front lines of today's biggest issues and proposing real solutions. Before we get started with each of these women in our conversation, I want to acknowledge the tragedy that has happened in Minnesota with the killing of Daunte Wright, and recognize that all of this is deeply connected, our politics, our systems, how we treat one another. And these are leaders that you're going to be talking to who are really leading with love and who are building within their communities to make sure that we continue to create systems that work for all of us, including our policing, our democracy. Many of us know that we are facing multiple crises, a global pandemic. That's why we're coming to you from Zoom. A racial reckoning. This is all deeply connected. Our struggling economy, where some folks are making billions and some folks can't get to the restroom. And we have a rapidly changing climate. These are all complex and connected problems. Women of color leaders are creating new strategies and pathways to carve out a new and different way to lead. Voters are rewarding them by getting them elected to the highest offices. But is it incumbent upon women of color to save us? We're going to dig into that conversation. Women of color have always led, but now with more formal and visible power, we do have a new opportunity to create better and more interconnected solutions for today's problems. So we're going to hear from three of those leaders today who are on the front lines of creating solutions in real time, from voter suppression in Georgia across the South, across the country, to the police violence in Minnesota, as I shared, and to successfully getting women elected to office, themselves included. So I want to welcome our three panelists, Ms. Latasha Brown, who is the founder of the Black Voters Matter, who is, if you don't know who Latasha Brown is, you have been living under a rock, folks, because this woman is, single-handedly, everything is done in coalition, but there is an energy and a force from Latasha Brown that has helped to reinvigorate a new kind of leadership model in voter engagement. She really leads with love in her voter engagement. She has the Blackest Bus in America that she has taken across the country. Please check out her full biography. I mean, she is in philanthropy. She helped me at the beginning of my career. She ran for office herself for the state legislature in Alabama, lost by something like 138 votes. She has won more awards for her work, but deserves all the accolades. She's at Harvard right now. They won't let her go. Year after year, they continue to make her make a special place for her. And if I would love to be a fly on that wall of those classrooms. And she is really doing it all, and has been part of the movement for what can be possible around our democracy. So we're going to hear from Latasha Brown. State Senator Patricia Torres Ray, longtime state senator, the first Latina in the Minnesota State Assembly, first Latina in the Minnesota State Senate, an immigrant, a force of nature in her community, re-elected, I think now 8 times, and is also always on the front lines of what's happening, just came off of the Senate floor And if you mind if I share, looking to make contracts more open and available to diverse constituents, to people of color, to indigenous communities, in contracting in the environmental sector. And there's a shortage of contractors in the environmental sector. So proposing, as I said, real solutions to the work that is happening on the ground right now as we speak. And my chief program officer at Vote Run Lead and my dear friend Paku Hang, also coming to us from St. Paul, who is both a political scientist on one hand and a community organizer at the other, and really sits at the intersection of how we move from these movement-based organizing and work into electoral power. She was part of the Paul Wellstone campaign. She has her roots deep in working with New Americans, in working with women, and she is the force behind some of the real shift in how my organization, our organization, Vote Run Lead, is tackling this new energy around women's leadership in America. So welcome, Paku. All right, so my first question is for you, Latasha. You know, we see this everywhere. According to the Brennan Center, something like 360 pieces of legislation, 47 states. Like, what are the 3 states that are not trying to suppress the vote right now, right? We just saw Georgia pass some pretty regressive legislation trying to claim that it was expansive of the vote. But it comes on the back of a long history in Georgia, you know this, of successful tactics. The disruption, the difference was that Black women, led by you, by Stacey Abrams, by folks like Nsé Ufot of the New Georgia Voter Project, were successful last year in a rigged system, right? You were successful. So now they're coming at it even stronger. But it's not a coincidence that these movements led by Black women, a full multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition, the rise in Black women's power is really actively trying to be squashed. So what does that mean for the state sort of wielding power over who gets to participate, who's a citizen, and walk us through this power reckoning that's happening in Georgia around Black women's leadership in the legislature?
So, Erin, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm really happy. I'm really happy to be a part of this conversation, because I do think that the time is now. You know, there's 2 pieces. You know, I want to kind of approach this question, answer this question from 2 perspectives. On one perspective, I want to share kind of giving some background around what is happening in the state of Georgia. But in some ways, I even think that the people who are listening to this may not be terribly surprised. They should be appalled at what's happening. You know, but
Right.
Whenever we've seen progress in this country, particularly led by women and particularly communities of color, there's been a backlash. And so what we're seeing is, quite frankly, we're seeing voter suppression bills that come out of, there was a historic turnout of African-American voters and voters of color and women in this last election cycle. And what we're seeing is this backlash to really be punitive for people for participating in the process. You know, unfortunately, that is historic, that anytime those communities that have been left out actually exert and use their power and affirm their power, there's been some kind of backlash. Oftentimes it's actually been accompanied by some kind of violent act, in which what we saw on January 6th at the State House. And so I think on one hand, you know, we have to acknowledge that there is this voter suppression, and that is happening because it is designed in a way to silence, to marginalize the voting power of people on the ground. You know, the second part, though, of this, what I want to share is bring the good news. The good news is that women are literally asserting ourselves, and women of color are asserting ourselves. And I think that, you know, when we fight, and I think when we make advancement, it's not just for ourselves, it's actually the entire community. That there has never, you can't find a single law that Black women have actually supported and pushed that did not literally raise the bar up for everybody, that did not change the circumstances for everybody. And so ultimately what we have to see is that at any time that you're actually creating, what I always say, that whenever you break, you know, put a little a crack in the ceiling, you let more light in the room. And whenever you let more light and more space in the room, it creates a bigger boat for all of us. And so fundamentally, I think also what is happening right now is we're seeing this tension of where people are asserting themselves who have been left out of the process, that women, particularly Black women, sit at this intersection of racism and sexism, which I think has been the 2 sins of America to really try to prevent us from actually being our highest and our best selves. Imagine if this country is majority women, right? And this country is on the precipice of being majority of people of color.
Right.
Imagine if we literally have systems and institutions that facilitate the fullness of their participation, of them using their skills, their talents. Imagine the possibilities that exist in there. So while on one hand, what we're seeing this attack on voting rights that I think women of color have been leading and literally beating the drum around. What we're also seeing is a multiracial, multi-generational coalition that we're also organizing, that's being developed, that's coalescing around, that we're saying that we deserve the kind of democracy like that's not just aspirational, but that in fact it can be achieved. And that literally when you're looking at this new coalition of young people, of older people, of white folks and black folk and Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and indigenous people, that fundamentally we are shifting the entire political landscape in this country. Right. That's the good news.
And so you have that good news, right? And then you do have this backlash. And I think the backlash we were talking in the prep is not just political, right? There's sort of this conversation right now we were talking about, Stacey Abrams buying a home, right? That the idea that we have to cut away at their cultural power of Black women leaders, of women of color leaders. We have to cut away at their political power. Credibility, absolutely. What are you seeing right now? I mean, we saw in the legislature, we saw a young Black woman in Georgia, Park Cannon, a state representative who was arrested for knocking on the door of the governor in the state capitol. Is that good news too? I think is the boldness.
Yeah, no, I think I love the question. I think that what we have to do is we have to be honest around, we all need support. And so if Black women, it's kind of like any good military knows that you want to make sure that you're also protecting your generals, right? And so if Black women are on the front lines of actually helping to lead this work, we also as a community have to have a collective, make sure that we're actually pulling a shield of support for them. What you alluded to, and some people may or may not know, is just recently, in the last few days, Breitbart and some other outlets have actually been posting information. They actually posted Patrisse Cullors, who leads the Black Lives Matter movement, who literally is one of the founders of the movement, and actually decided to serve as the executive director to help the organizational component develop. What she and her partner recently bought some homes, right? Oh, okay. She does not take a dime of resources from the organization, right? There's no evidence of that. There's no linkage of that. But they've actually there's tons of media to make the appearance as in some way this woman, who actually has a New York Times bestseller, got another deal for a book deal, actually has a speaking engagement, has a deal with Warner Brothers. She has her own set of work, literally to justify buying a home, like literally just buying a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom home. Like it is made the front of papers. We're seeing the same thing with Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams bought a home, and somehow that made the news that this Black woman had the audacity to buy a home, in DeKalb County in Georgia. My point is there's this an element that what we also have to do is oftentimes when Black women make ourselves available, we get on the front lines, that there are those that have not been protective of us, that we stood on 100 years ago in the women's suffrage movement. We stood with our white sisters and our counterparts. They did not continue to stand with us. That when we saw Shirley Chisholm, not only were there like women, but there were also some of our male colleagues that did not stand with us. And so I'm raising this. I think that this is an opportunity for us to understand how significant the leadership and the voices and the vision of Black women, not just in terms of making a better world for ourselves, but a better world for all of us, how critical their voices are, and that we also have to have a collective way of where we are actually pushing back, and we're providing protection and support and pushback of the leadership of those Black women.
That's right. And I pushed on that question because we've almost like in a way build this session as a workshop, right? In the sense that the folks that are listening, you are hearing this from women on the front lines. Like, these are the nuggets. These are the things you write down when we talk in white allyship. We talk about doing the work, right? Like, you're getting a master class right now. So get your pen and paper out, okay? How we can be supportive, what that really means, what that looks like for folks, and holding that community and keeping that strength so that folks like LaTosha Brown can stay out there on her bus. I don't know where you are. You're always in a different state every day of the week. So thank you for saying that. Senator Patricia Torres Ray, I want to go to you. Minnesota is hurting again. Still, I don't know that it's an again. It's a still. It's a salt on the wound kind of feeling in these past couple of days as we watch the trial of Derek Chauvin, as we witness through body camera footage the death of Dante Wright, of this pattern of behavior that is not, something specific to Minnesota, that is a national pandemic, a national problem in our country. You have been on the front lines of so much of the work, and you are so connected to your community. As I said, having reelected you, I see you in the newspapers. I see the photos of you. This is one of these reforms, right? This is a different kind of gender and systems, right? This is a Black men at the hands of police. But as a on the ground woman of color leader, as a fairly lone voice, it's a small community of Black and Indigenous people of color in the legislature, and especially in the Senate, growing, of course, in the legislature. Tell us what you're seeing and hearing on the ground, and tell us how we can do some of the reimagining that LaTosha is talking about, and how we can implement some of the basic changes that I think the community is demanding. So we have two challenges. We have these basic demands, I think, that are coming from our communities. And then we have this idea of reimagining that we also saw even former President Barack Obama tweet about. So I would love just to hear your perspective about how we do that from a legislative process.
So it's an interesting dynamic, what is taking place, nationwide in this country, and what is taking place here in Minnesota. And it connects. I think I see some similar patterns. One thing that I see is this new model, right, that we are building, that we are shaping as we experience these moments of pain and challenges. So one of the issues that I see is that the local community and local issues are really what is inspiring us at a very kind of local level, at a very personal level, right? So right now, you mentioned my city and what is happening to our families, to people that we know,
right,
to families that we know. So that's personal. That is personal. It's happening in my city. It's happening to my neighbor. It's happening to my classmate. And there's a level of inspiration that takes place that cannot happen in any other form, right? So I can see, a woman of color. I can see a friend. I can see somebody, running for vice president and be inspired by that. But having a neighbor that is next door really coming to fight and demand attention takes it to a very new level. This is what is happening in Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities, in Minnesota. That this is our family, and we're going to fight for our family, and we're going to do whatever it takes to protect our family. And if that means running for office, we're going to dare to run for office, because we're going to change these systems, and we're not going to tolerate what is happening right now. So I'm very inspired by this moment, that although it's a painful moment, is inspiring us to go to the streets, to find each other, to talk to each other about why is this happening? What are the laws that are in place or not in place? What can they help me do? And why is their presence in the streets and these conversations so important to the work that I do? And so there is an exchange of experience and passion and information that feeds on each other. Right. So I say to my friends in the streets, we need more people in the Senate. I cannot do this by myself. There is no way. We need numbers. And so people go, where do we have a chance? Who do you think is going to retire so that I can run? So there's this exchange that is happening as a result of this moment of pain in the streets. So I see that happening right now. So there's the value of this, that it is very close to us, is very personal. It's about our families. It's about our friends. It's about our communities. And then we're also finding that we can help each other. You know, that we have experiences of people who can organize in the streets, who can educate in the streets to make these voting system work, so that more people will participate in the voting process, so that we can elect more of us. Right. We are connecting all of these dots in a very organic way, but in a very profound way. And we're doing it in the streets in this moment.
I definitely see that happening. I think particularly for the city council, right? We have a ranked choice voting system in Minneapolis that has elected one of the most diverse city councils in the country, including some of our fellow Vote Run leaders who we love. But then we have the other thing that we're learning about the sort of system that is holding up, I think, some of the progress around conversations, even around police reform and reimagination, is we have a charter commission in Minneapolis, right? Which is an unelected, mostly white body that is stopping this very diverse, connected to the community council. Can you talk to us a little bit about, the value of RCV? It's something that might even pass statewide in Minnesota as a system, right? That elects more people of color, that elects more women, but also some of these snags that when we do start to dig into our democracy and dig into politics, people go, what the heck is this charter commission? You know, who are these people? How do they have this power? So can you demystify that a little bit for the audience?
That is everywhere. What people don't realize is that these structures that control power were created precisely to do that, right? Yeah. And these structures continue to grow, as Latasha was explaining. The more you try to gain power, the more you try to penetrate these systems, the more the people who are in control try to restructure these systems and make it more complicated. Right. So this fight for control, started a long time ago in the 60s, in the 50s in this country. It didn't start today. Right. And it was in that moment, when the African American community, when the indigenous community, when some of our farmers began to really think about, okay, we now have a way of building power, organizing, working with labor, working in coalitions with the environmentalists, with other activists. So then the people in control begin to create structures to stop that. That's how it works. So they have been creating these systems, that are so complicated, and people lose track of it. Well, I elected my mayor. Well, your mayor doesn't have any power, right. Because that's how it's structured. Well, but I also elected, city council members. Well, but there is a commission that has to recommend the policy. What? Well, those layers of control of power were creating as we were gaining power and understanding of how power works. So that's where we are now. And we are understanding what that is, and now we have to undo that. Yep. But remember, they are also working very diligently, just like Latasha would say, discrediting us and saying, well, are they really truly the representatives of the community? Are they really with the grassroots? They're buying a house. Where are they getting money from? They are working to discredit us, to dismantle the power that we are building as community and as leaders. So it works together. It always goes. So they go together. Our job is to figure out how to be ahead. It's not a simple task, but they are working as we work, trying to protect the power that they have. That's and right. We're trying to penetrate these systems, restructure systems, and gain control. We're both working to gain control of these systems and these structures.
Thank you. And Paku, that's like the segue to, you've been almost nearly 30 years at this intersection, right, of community power, electoral power as a candidate yourself. We see a rise in women running for office after a major tragedy often, right? Like Anita Hill or the election of Donald Trump. And yes, I just called it a tragedy. And now a global and we're in the thick of this sort of racial reckoning, this global pandemic. We're not over this period just yet. We're seeing more folks vote for women, vote for more women of color. But we're also seeing, we're coming up against some of these systems that have not been built by us or for us, and that, as Patricia said, are continuing to be built in the moment to continue to dismantle our power. How do we dismantle that power? What does that look like? What's that new model?
Right. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Erin, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And I want to say I love Latasha and I love Patricia, and I feel so honored to be on this panel with them. So thank you so much. You guys are my heroes, and I love it because you've always led with love. And I just hope that I can, follow in your footsteps. Erin, to answer your question, first off, I want to step back a little bit, and I want to remind people that, I grew up as a Catholic, and this is the season we just finished Easter. And so in a way, we're in the season of resurrection, right? Of rebirth. And just like you said, we had a horrible year, 2020. We had the pandemic, we had the racial uprisings, we had such clarity in, what this country is and what it can be. And so even though I'm calling from Minneapolis and St. Paul, and there's like a lot of heartbreak and grief here, I'm also very hopeful because 2022 is coming. And I believe in my heart that there is going to be a groundswell of women and women of color that are going to be running for public office later this year, for next year, and there's going to hopefully be a transformation in our democracy. And to answer your question, there is a new leadership model that is emerging. It's a leadership model that is centering women of color, and just like Latasha said before, it's shedding light, right, on women of color as leaders. Right now, I think the people, the citizens, are rejecting the kind of incompetency and the callousness of our politics. They're rejecting the hyperpartisanship, the gridlock that we're seeing all across our levels of government, from U.S. Congress, that I'm sure Patricia can talk about, the gridlock in the state legislatures. So folks are rejecting that, and they're turning to a model of leaders who are trustworthy, right, leaders who are not only competent, but leaders who care. And over, women of color, are the people who are rising to meet that challenge. But honestly, Erin, and I want folks to know this, throughout our history, women of color have always been the ones who were pushing our democracy to be better, to be more true to its ideals. Like we know about Mumbet, who after the revolution, she was a formerly enslaved person in Massachusetts, and she sued for her freedom in Massachusetts. And these freedom lawsuits were what really, started the groundswell of slavery being eradicated in the North. We also know about the mothers and grandmothers who were part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. This was a group of a number of Native American tribes in New York, and they came together like a confederation. And it was really the women, right, who held this confederation together, and the suffragists, the women leaders in the American suffragist movement. They came to these grandmothers and elders in the Native community to learn about feminism, to learn about equality. So we just don't know these stories. They, like Latasha said, their light was not shined on them, but they were actually the force behind, the democracy, the ideals of democracy. And I think in 2022, women of color are going to continue to push us in that direction. And I think this is the better model because it's a model that's reflective, of our communities. We know that white men, rich white men, are overrepresented in our in Congress and all levels of government, and people are wanting to be truly a democracy of the people, for the people, by the people. And that's what's exciting me.
One of the words you said, Paku, was trustworthy, right? And I think, and this question I'll open to each of you. So jump in if you have an answer. We have very low trust in our democracy right now, right? I think it's why you partially see some women like a Stacey Abrams sort of have this idolization, right? Because we don't trust our systems, right? We know there's essentially minority rule. Take a look at the Senate, it's split 50-50, but actually the Democrats represent 41 more million people, right? We understand gerrymandering to be at the state legislative level, that small, often rural, overly white conservative groups somehow maintain power because of how geography and lines are written, right? But is not reflective of that community. And then trust in our democracy, you have a former president going around saying the election is rigged, leading to violence, right? Sustained violence over time. Saying on that side that we can't trust the outcome. So, no matter sort of where you land, there is a real erosion of trust. You throw in some, the sort of social media, bad media conversation, the disinformation conversation. So I don't think it's not the responsibility of women. It's not the responsibility of women of color to reshape this trust, but it is falling on us, right? And so how it's like I'm not sure what the question is here, but yeah, okay, Latasha, I see. Like there's
I
a
actually hear it.
here.
I mean,
Yeah.
I hear. I think your question is I think you're clear about it. I think it's embedded in, what you shared. How do we rebuild trust? And I think part of the issue is we have to shift the paradigm. The goal isn't to get people to build trust into a system that we know is inherently flawed. We have to get people to build trust in we the people. That fundamentally what the Constitution says, it doesn't say we the political parties. It doesn't say we the best candidates. It doesn't say, if you find the most charismatic, perfect leader. In many ways, we've actually been conditioned to believe that in some way, if we pick the right leader, everything is going to fall in line because the system is fine. That's all we got to do is just pick the right people, when we know inherently that is not what we're up against. Inherently, what we are up against is institutional racism and sexism. White male patriarchy has been fundamental as the foundation of all of the institutions and the creation of institutions in this country. When I talk about opportunity, I often start with this frame with asking everybody, even the people that are here. I always do this. I ask people to close their eyes and I ask the question, just like close your eyes for a second. And then my question to you is, what would America look like without racism and sexism? Now, I don't know what the answer is, right? But we're not asking that question. As long as we're centering it on this issue of please trust this thing that doesn't work. That's like asking you to trust my Ford Escort. I had my first car was a Ford Escort, and it kept breaking down. At some point, it kept breaking down. I mean, it just wasn't a trustworthy car, right? It was just past it's. I had to get another car. I had to upgrade. My point is that we also have to recognize the kind of democracy. Like democracy means one thing when white people are the vast majority, right? When we're talking about a shifting demographic that we're seeing, when we're seeing a young population, this is the first time in this country's history in the last 40 years, right? That the baby boomers are no longer the dominant political class in this country. Now it's actually young people. So there's a different kind of opportunity that we have to reshape and reframe a reflective democracy, a democracy that is inclusive, like a democracy. And so I'm raising this because I think the issue isn't to get people to have trust into broken systems. The issue is to have people to really trust in the premise that if we collectively work together and we vision together and we build power together, that we can actually create the nation that we all deserve. And that if we're doing that and moving towards that, then we all benefit, that it can be a win-win. I am also one of those people that I don't believe that you got to have a nation that's only have one party. I think that the way that you have a robust democracy, but we can't have one party that is really a petty propaganda machine for white patriarchy supremacy, right? We're going to have to be able to distinguish that and say that's not right now what we're working up against. Voting rights is not a partisan issue. It should not matter whether it's a Republican or a Democrat that is in office, whether my rights are protected or Patricia's rights are protected or Paku's rights are protected. We have to literally look at democracy as a value. So I'll just say that part of what I think is the issue is not really around us thinking about trust. We have to really center ourselves on a conversation around what do we value as a nation? If we value democracy, do we value reflective democracy? Do we value inclusivity? And so I think that's the conversation we have to have. And then we have to literally open up our eyes around this space of what would America look like without racism and sexism? That's the place that I want to go.
Yeah. And Patricia, Senator Torres-Ray, the idea that I think another one of these questions that, is being asked in the wrong way is like, how do we have this, how do we have this civility, right? When, civility is just sort of a BS conversation. So like, how do you and the people that are rising up be quiet, right? And that we're going to say your behavior is out of bounds politically, in order for you to not actually get your voice heard. when what we truly need is, I think, what Latasha is talking about. How does that show up, in lawmaking right now? I mean, I think, hearing that you just came off the floor, and aren't likely to get something that is a need for your entire state passed. So tell us what that tension is of how we make those sort of incremental changes that sometimes we don't get the big win, but how do you stay and how do you persevere, especially when it happens around some of these big issues like police reform, as you've talked about, as a state and local issue. So how do we continue to chip away at this new vision that Latasha is talking about?
What is interesting, I think, I'm hoping that to tie this into your question, is that when you ask people about their local leaders, they tend to trust their local leaders, whomever they are. And so that's the power of an incumbent, right? So they talk about how when you're an incumbent, you really, have a lot of leverage and you have a lot of power. You're likely to get reelected because people tend to see their local leaders differently, right? They just, I trust him, I know her. But what we are beginning to understand now is that is not translating into that person represents my interest. Yeah, I know him, but that person is not representing my interest. I think this is a very powerful moment for people of color, for women of color, for indigenous people, for minorities, because I think media and information has given us that opportunity to recognize that the people that are there were people that kind of we trusted, we kind of thought that we knew. But in essence, they really don't know our personal experience. They don't know our struggle. And because they don't know our struggle, we know each other, but they cannot speak for us, right? And so we are really beginning to understand the complexity of what it means. Well, she's my neighbor, but she doesn't have a clue of what I am going through. Who has a clue of what I'm going through? Well, is that African-American woman, is that indigenous woman who lives in this district way up there, who's talking about my lived experience. And I want her to speak for me in the Senate. I think we're seeing more and more that today. And so that presents for us a tremendous opportunity, not only to connect, across boundaries, geographic boundaries. When I work with Winona LaDuke, working on environmental issues as the lead on environment. So she's far, far away north, but she has a coalition that is so vital to the message that I have to deliver here in the Senate. And so our connection is so deep. And I, said to her, we might have to recruit you to run for governor. You ran for vice president so long ago, but maybe we have to push you in a different direction. So I think that the solution is exactly there, where we are beginning to see these connections that exist when we understand that the people who need to be here speaking on our behalf are not necessarily these persons that we have known for so long, that are kind of the powerful people, the relatives, the families of this, that really understand these complex dynamics of the structure of the Senate and the judiciary and how does it work in order to make police reform. What we really need to bring here are the voices of the people who have experienced police action in their neighborhood so that they can come and talk about that experience, because that is the experience of the overwhelming majority of Americans. They can speak with authority and legitimacy as to how this system needs to be restructured, because they had that life experience. Their brothers, their sisters have that life experience with the police. So they have more authority and more experience than anybody else, regardless of their degrees, their level of knowledge of the complexity of the system, the judiciary committee, whatever it is, it really doesn't matter. They don't speak from an experience that needs to be present here, making those decisions about the laws that we need to create for the future.
Well, and we have a question actually from Catherine that actually says, earlier this week, after the killing of Dante Ray, that you called out the legislature for cutting off the debate earlier about police reform. Do you think there will be ramifications for some of your colleagues who shut that conversation down?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it needs to be. And I'm going to give you an example of something that is that happened to me very recently. with some of the most important advocates here in Minnesota. She called me and she said, Patricia, do you know that a friend of yours have placed a complaint before the Minnesota Association of Attorneys about some of the work that I am doing related to the George Floyd case? I could not believe that my other progressive white attorney friend, who is a very liberal progressive friend, had filed a complaint against this activist. It couldn't get in my brain because we are working together. And so I had a conversation with both. And so my friend activist said, this is an ongoing thing for me. All of your friends who claim to be these progressive white Democrats are constantly after me with complaints, with calls, with messages that really diminish my voice. They try to diminish my voice and my presence. Exactly what you were saying, Latasha, at the beginning, discrediting me for things that I do that are just kind of normal, everyday things that they will never complain about if their white friends do this. It will never occur to them that that was a problem. But for everything I do, it is always a constant. Oh, that's a problem. Oh, you're saying something that is a conflict of interest. Oh, she's saying something that is just so inappropriate. She's instigating. She is just really creating a problem and inspiring these kids to go out and do this and do the other. They are, constantly targeting us because they see us through a different lens. And so it's very problematic because we need these allies. I need my white friends understanding this. You can't. So you're placing a complaint because you have a problem with this. Why didn't you call her and say, I have a problem with this? Could we talk? Oh no, I had to place a complaint and take it to this very, high level, creating a significant problem because she now has to hire an attorney, figure out how to file a complaint against. So it gets and she needs her energy for something else.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
She needs her energy.
Erosion. Yeah. And I think even
these individuals who really believe that they are doing the right thing, right? Because I think that was inappropriate. I think that was inappropriate. And then they realize, oh yeah, I guess I went too far. Well, you created a significant problem for me because I'm expending my energy trying to deal with your nonsense action. And I am depleted from my energy to work in this arena where I need to be influential.
And I think that, if we're naming this as a workshop, like we think, okay, this is maybe only coming from, the sort of far right, that these are strategic choices to sort of erode our resiliency, when this is coming from within our community, and this is a learning for me. I've done stuff like this. We have to have our eyes open and we have to hear the feedback of women of color when they say, why didn't you pick up the phone? Right? Like that how we behave with one another, how we treat one another. There's a bit of decency here that was just skipped over, right? There was a bit of sort of dignity and decency that was just skipped over to even, they could have gone to you to get to your friend. They could, and so I want us as allies to have our eyes open to that story. Thank you for sharing it, Patricia, because there's so much there in what we are doing, I think, to some of our women of color leaders that is putting a lot more weight, a lot more burden, and sort of eroding that resiliency.
Erin,
go ahead. Yes.
I just want to share, around what I think is important. I think for all of us, I think is, I always believe in this piece around grace and space, that I'm constantly telling our staff and the people we work with that at the end of the day, if we're going to build the kind of nation, the kind of world that I believe that we deserve, it is going to require us granting some grace and space to each other. And so in that process, though, what it also is going to require is that we actually do a self-check and a self-examination of how oppression lives in us. There is no way that we can actually be brought up in a culture that is rooted in sexism and racism and has created a hierarchy of who has value and who does not have value, and it doesn't impact us. And so sometimes, because we've actually we've gone through a race racial justice workshop, or we've been doing social justice work. We think that we're free of it when we're not. When we're simmered in an environment and a culture that every single day is like rooted in racism and sexism and homophobia, all of those things. And so, I often share this story, just this quick story around how, a couple of years ago, I decided I wanted to go on a diet because I was going to be fine and get in a 2-piece bikini by the summer. And so I needed to go on this diet. And then this diet, I could only have one cheat meal a week. And so on this particular day, I'd gone to in Atlanta, it's called Gladys Knight Chicken and Waffles. And so I went to Gladys Knight Chicken and Waffles. As I was going inside, there was this homeless man that was standing outside who was eating food. Someone had given him their food, and I talked to him for a little while. And I went inside, got my food, and the food is so good. The chicken it was probably about 12,000 calories per chicken wing. That's how good it was, right? But I'm saying this story because I actually saved my food. I ate part of it, but it was my one cheat meal, so it was like gold, right? And so I'm going to take my food home. But also in the culture of my family, growing up in the Deep South, in my family, if anybody asks you for food, you are obliged to give them food. Right? Like there's no questioning. If people say they're hungry, you have to feed them. Right. And so when I went outside, the same man who I'd seen eating food earlier, he asked me for my food. Now, mind y'all, these are my precious chicken wings that I'm eating, my only cheat meal that I can have. Right. So I'm in a dilemma because I'm like, what? My chicken wings? But I got to give it to him, right? Because it's coming up on my values. So I give him my chicken wings and I give it to him. I give him the box and I said, here, you can have it. You probably eat better than I do. And he said to me, what do you think I shouldn't? And it messed me up. Here I am, right, Miss Social Justice Activist. Right. Here I am, someone who's actually helped to get homeless shelters. Here I am, Miss, you need to do right by homeless people. That in that moment, what I discovered by myself that I did not know about myself, it messed with me so bad, is that I did have a judgment, that I had a belief that because this man was homeless, that I should be eating better than he. And it came out when in that moment when I was angry and I was like, here's the food, you probably eat better than I do, right? My point is that all of us, it doesn't matter who we are, and we don't have to feel a sense of guilt. We almost do this zero-sum game that we're literally like I've already done that. I'm not racist. I'm not sexist. I'm not homophobic. The bottom line is we're simmering in this oppressive kind of value system every single day. The one thing that we can do with this work around the real change starts with us. And so I'm just saying that because as we're thinking about these pieces, right, as we're thinking about moving forward, as we're thinking about supporting women of color, that is really important for all of us to actually check in with our own implicit biases. It is important for us to check in on how we value and how we're perceiving information and where that information is coming from. That is one element of how we're going to create change. We also have to really shift and change our whole paradigm of which we see the world as well.
That's right. And to continue to be on it. And every time I hear that story of, it like hits me in the same spot. I have my own reflections of doing stuff, so again, I hope everyone has their pen and paper out. Like you get to have some grace and space with yourself, but you have to be conscious, right? You've got to be working on it. You got to make sure that you're not closing your eyes to stuff when it's tough. I'm sure the chicken was so hard to give up because I'm sure it was delicious.
Especially when you only got one meal a week, like one cheat meal a week. So it wasn't the chicken. What came out is my value system. Right. It was my own biases against folks. And I just offer that we give grace and space to ourselves and others, that we don't be afraid to acknowledge when we're wrong and where we need to grow.
Yeah. And I'm also
leadership quality. I think it is grace and space, right, Paku? But I think we're talking about some of these individual behaviors. Patricia, you just talked about that. Latasha as well. Paku, can you talk about some of the systemic changes? I mean, we have a big 5 at Vote Run Lead, where these are the big things that have to change in order for the culture, the individual action to match up with the systems. What are those big 5? And can you talk a little bit about some of the big systemic changes that need to occur?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to piggyback on what Patricia and Latasha said, that we are in a moment in a space for change, though. We have been isolated the past year, and we have to ask ourselves, are we interested in just rebuilding what used to be? Are we interested in real transformation? So if we're interested in real transformation, then it's not just about the changing of our individual behaviors, it's a changing of our culture, which ties into our policies. And it's also changing into the actual people who are our leaders and represent us and are supposed to exemplify the very best of us, right? And in Vote, Run, Lead, we have been thinking and reflecting on this a lot, because for a long time, we've been training women across the country at all levels, because we believe fundamentally that women are the leaders that we have been waiting for, right? That women's lived experiences, the way that they have been treated in the world, the way that they see the world, exactly the healing balm that we need for our democracy. But we've also are seeing that when we don't have enough women in these strategic positions, look at what happens. We have over 500,000 people who died this year. And I, in my heart, cannot believe that if there were not more teachers, there were not more nurses, there were not more mothers in positions of decision making, that the policy that we had this past year would have been different, that we would not have the high casualty that we have right now with COVID. And so it is asking us, how can we be strategic in what the opportunity in front of us? And at Vote, Run, Lead, that's why we have really focused on the state legislature as a remedy to create a democracy that we deserve. And the reason why we're focusing at state legislatures, because that's where the fight is. I mean, Patricia, you were talking about some of these policies that actually the public, the majority of the public agree with, right? These policies are in place and they're being debated at the congressional level, at the local level, the city councils, but also in the state legislatures. And unfortunately, we don't see a lot of progress happening at the federal level, but we have seen examples, whether it's like family paid leave or whether it's police accountability in Colorado. We have seen progressive with a small p policies to get us to a better democracy. We have seen some of these policies passed at the state legislature. So that's where the fight is, and that's where we should be. And on top of that, state legislatures, they happen every 2 years, right? So people can work in campaigns, make mistakes, maybe lose, but then get back up and learn them again. State legislatures can be like little mini democracy labs that we can work on. And then going back to what we were talking about earlier in this conversation about leaders, right? There's a question whether women are electable or are they viable. But in the state legislature, you have multiple positions, visible positions of women as leaders, whether it's like the Speaker of the House or the majority leader, the minority leader. Well, if you start seeing all these women in these visible leadership positions, suddenly your mind not thinking, oh, could a woman be a leader? You're like, which woman isn't a leader? And on top of that, we also have, places where I'm just going to say here, women are also just like, they govern differently, right? Women are more collaborative, they're more civil to each other, they're more bipartisan. And we are seeing our country gripped with gridlock and with hyperpartisanship. And if we have women in the state legislature, we could really eradicate a lot of those dynamics. And so the moment in front of us is really a question for all of us. And like Latasha was saying, it's a question for us to really reflect for ourselves. Am I interested in just rebuilding, or am I interested in transforming?
Right.
And the answer is transformation. Then how am I going to do that differently? And for me, I would say, how am I going to do that strategically and efficiently? And for me, it's the legislature.
Yeah, I think that's right. So we have another question come in, and I want to open this, because I do think, we are substituting some of that leadership right now with corporate leadership, right? You saw these 100 CEOs get on a call, or 700, corporate leaders get on and say that these voter suppression laws in Georgia, I know it took Delta a minute, and I know you dragged them, Latasha, in order to get them to do it. But we have this leadership vacuum. And so now we've had this rise of sort of the business community to have an economic engine to make some of these changes, right? To actually, what does Black Lives Mattering mean to this company if you're not going to actually stand up when they're taking away basic voting rights, right? When they're saying you can't hand out water to people in the state of Georgia waiting on a line. So we have a very powerful group of people at Skoll, the World Forum. And the question coming in from, I think it's Jama Adams, is what would you tell these powerful and influential people that need to support your work, right? That maybe are from different sectors, that might not say run for the legislature, though we'll get you to do it. But, that are in these other places that have these other levers where we could be, getting them to do the right thing. So what do you need to say to the sort of the influencers at the Skoll World Forum to support your work?
So I'm going to go back to my first question I asked. I'm going back to, you know, radically reimagining this system. That part of what I think has given, even when we're thinking about some of the technological advances that gave the US an edge over other places, was based on innovation and creativity. I mean, we can't figure out how we can actually share a world together. What we can't figure out, being the wealthiest nation in the world, to figure out how we can actually share resources in a way that people have their basic needs met. It's not a matter of it's not possible. It's a matter of we have not shown the public will, right? That we've had the will to actually create that as a value system, because it is absolutely and certainly possible. And so I think there are three things that can happen. The first thing is my question. I want every single person, if you all don't remember anything else I say, right? If I want every person that's watching this to take some time with that question: what would this nation look like without sexism and racism? What are the possibilities that exist when people are able to tap into, unencumbered, to tap into their power? Like how much talent are we cutting out? How much of creativity are we like marginalizing because we're stuck in this paradigm of racism and sexism and homophobia? So I think that's the first piece. I think there is a change part. There's a call, and related to that same question, that challenge is what is being called of you in this moment. If COVID-19 didn't do anything else, it came, I think, to teach us how interconnected and interdependent we are. And so we need each other. If we are to make a new world, is possible. But in order for us to achieve that, it is going to require all of us actually digging in, and for us to move beyond our comfort zone to create this kind of world that we envision. And so I think it's important that, one, we start with envisioning. What is our vision for this world that actually where human beings are treated with love, with honor and love and respect? Can we create a world that literally the core value is for the love of humanity? The second thing, though, I think is really important is recognizing that organizations play a critical and vital role in this. So those organizations that are on the front lines, organizations like Vote, Run, Lead, I'm going to have, Erin, I've got to commend you in that work and the work that you've been doing over the years and work that we've done together, that the truth of the matter is whenever you are creating new contexts and new frameworks for women to actually be more representative in office, that it creates the opportunity for us to radically reimagine new approaches to problems and new solutions to problems. And so I think organizations like Vote, Run, Lead, organizations like my own, that are really doing work to not just address what we're dealing with right now, but to move forward, that they are critical. And many people who are watching this, you can actually provide and lend your support, whether that's financial support, whether that's being ambassadors to the work, whether it's using your circle of influence to really be able to lift up the work. And the third and the final thing that I'll say is I think it's really important, as we're kind of like thinking about how we're doing this work, that we have to really recognize that all of this is rest on democracy. If we don't have democracy if we allow democracy to be eroded, and let's be clear that democracy in America has been aspirational. It has not been achieved as it was laid out in the Declaration of Independence. When is the last time you read the Declaration of Independence? It is an absolutely beautiful statement. Like literally, if we're looking at the Declaration of Independence and the wording, and in that, can we not make that be real? And so I think it's really important that we also really make a check in our own and recommit ourselves to really embracing this notion that we can create a nation that people have access, not only just access to the ballot, but they have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What is so bad about that? I think it's possible.
Yep. I think so. I agree.
I am thinking more radically these days, and thinking that corporate doesn't have a choice.
Yeah.
We are your customers. We are your students. We are your consumers. You cannot do this without us. It's just that simple. So it is in your best interest to think with us, about us, and not to leave us to be an afterthought, because then you will be behind. That's my advice. When you think on your own without the participation of your consumers, of your students, of your patients, of your workers, you are way behind the curve. To be ahead, you have to think and be and proceed with us. Then you will be ahead, because what you are doing, that exercise helps you shape power with the people who have the power. We hold the power. And so you are shaping a notion of company, of structure, of a container, of a product, or a system that actually is based on that experience of the people who have ultimately the control, because we're going to consume it, we're going to use it, we're going to study it. So I think it's a simple proposal after all, because it's not that scientific.
Right.
It's like in your family. If you're going to cook a dinner that nobody's going to eat, you're going to have to toss it. You're just going to have to throw it away, and you lost all your time and your money, and you just will be so disappointed. So why don't you include your partner, your kids, and then cook a meal that you are all going to eat? It's just that simple in my view. So that's what I believe corporate really needs to continue to think, is that they will be ahead when they really incorporate the voices and the participation of our communities. It's
and then stand with us, right? Because they too need the democracy to work, right?
Of course.
They need the trust. They can't have this erosion. That is not good for business either. So I think you're right. Self-interest is a part of it, and standing with us. Paku, I want to go back though to I think there's a lot of ignorance. There's a low civic literacy, I think, not just in our companies, but just nationally, right? We've taken this out of schools. People don't understand, how some of these systems work writ large. So what are these big five things? This universal suffrage, that we're talking about, that corporations, that elected leaders, that folks in our legislature, that voters need to know about as the levers of change to open up this system, bring in more light, and diversify and reflect our population in this country.
Right. So at Vote Run Lead, we really focused on 5 democratic reform issues, right? The first one, and Aaron, you mentioned this already, was ranked choice voting. We think that we don't necessarily have to abide by a two-party system or winner take all, 50% take all, 50% plus one take all, that we could change the way that people vote and people select their elected officials. And that way that would move to not only a more holistic way of thinking about representation, but also studies have shown, and we see this just we see it in actuality, that more women and people of color get elected under ranked choice voting. So that's number one. Number two is universal suffrage. It's the expansion of voting. It's making same-day voter registration available. It's making mail-in ballots easily accessible. It means dropping off your voter at a place where it's accessible to you. It means registering to vote in a very simple automatic registration. Registering to vote in a very simple way. Number two. Number three, it's about getting money out of politics. And maybe this is where the United States is unique compared to other countries around the world. I know this is an international forum, but money has such a hold in the way that we do campaigns, that the majority of the time candidates are raising money. So what that means is they're talking to a select few number of people who have a lot of money to try to fund their campaign, when in actuality they should be talking to all the people in their neighborhood and in their districts who are their constituents and who they should be listening to then make laws that actually better the community. And so if we can get big money out of our campaigns and our politics, we would probably have a more robust and reflective democracy. And then fourth, we are very concerned about the way that in the United States, when we vote for president, the people vote, and certain states then assign the winner of the the citizens, they assign those votes to the candidates, right? But the truth is, the people who actually decide who wins presidential elections is the Electoral College. And this was a system that actually was created really to prop up slavery. And nowadays, it's an antiquated system. We don't need the Electoral College anymore. And not only that, oftentimes, and Erin, you and I in our own lifetimes, we've seen twice the Electoral College go against actually the majority of voters. And so we need to eradicate the electoral college so that it truly is a representation of what the voters wanted. And then last but not least, we have to change gerrymandering. We have to make sure that districts are created in a fair way so that real representation can happen. Because right now, one of the reasons why we have such gridlock or such hyperpartisanship in this country, right, is because the districts where people come from are so woefully Democrat or Republican that there is no accountability when they do ridiculous things like I'm just thinking about Representative Marjorie from Georgia. When they do ridiculous things, there's no accountability. And until we give that kind of accountability so that we can have sane people go to Congress, make good policies that support everybody, we won't have the democracy that we deserve. So these 5 things are really core to reforming our democracy.
Yes, and I think as we think about some of the influencers, some of the international folks that are listening in, the tech community has built beautiful maps that are around fair redistricting. We have the technology to do this really fairly. We manipulate that technology when we, this party or that party. But if we can do this as a set of innovators who can do this differently. If we look at voting reform from a place of universal suffrage and build from there, why do we put it on the individual to register? The state, it should be on the state, it should be on the government to make sure they're tracking us down and that we're voting. We need to be flipping that mindset about whose responsibility it is. It's not my responsibility. The state should be begging me, the country should be begging me to vote and making it as easy as possible for that to happen. And we should be rewarding the folks. Same thing with ranked choice voting. It's not some, there's no constitutional line that says, we have to vote where we only get to vote for one person. Here in New York City, where I live, we are voting for the mayor for the first time using ranked choice voting. We have more women of color candidates running. They're more viable than they've ever been. The result, even in just changing the system, also then changes who gets to run. And ranked choice voting has been passed in the state of Maine. It's used in Alaska. These are places that these are bipartisan reforms. And so there is huge bodies of research. Right now, because of the way the system is set up, we are stuck in minority rule, where small districts, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly conservative, get to control the majority of government. And so, as you heard from our speakers today, it is about our individual accountability to ourselves, how we behave, how we lead with love, how we support those of us on the front lines, some of the cultural stuff around our corporations, our different sectors behaving better, standing with us, both in their own self-interest, but because it is also the right thing to do. And then these systemic reforms that are going to be the levers of how we create a more just democracy. So as we are closing, I want to give an opportunity for each of our speakers to just close us out here with a few minutes left, and some words of wisdom as we think about this new model, as we think about women of color like yourselves who are leading the way, what you want to share with the Skoll audience. And Senator Torres-Ray, why don't we start with you?
Thank you. After being 15 years in the Minnesota Senate, I think what I want to relate to you is that many, many times I find myself in a place where people are asking me to compromise. And compromising means that I cannot be transformational, that I cannot ask for this radical change that is necessary in this country. So I cannot do that. This compromising has been shaped, has been delivered or has been asked of me as in a way that is not compromising. It is actually moving to accept that this very minimal incremental change is all we need. And we're far beyond that. So I would like to share with all of these women who are running for office, who are always asked to just wait for their turn, to accept incremental step, to accept that this is the way things are, and they just really need to work harder in order to transform policy, to transform the things that need to be transformed right now in order to really respond to the needs that we have is no. You are ready. You have good ideas. You are ready to ask for this transformational change that is necessary. You are right, and you are ready to take on power, build coalition with other women, and really make a difference. And so this is my advice to everyone. Don't compromise, but really take action. You're ready to do this, and you will always find friends like us on the way, friends like Vote, Run, Lead, to help you with the tools that you may not have yet, but they are there for you. They are available to you, and we're eager to help with that process so that you can be in our circles. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I was just going to riff actually off of what Patricia said and say that, I really believe that we are the ones that we've been waiting for. And one of the important kind of aphorisms that we have at Vote, Run, Lead is that you are enough. So often we think that we need to have that PhD, or we have to wait until we get that amazing award for us to be worthy of, being an elected official or running for even higher office. And the truth is that, you are enough, and you are exactly the kind of person that we need right now. Aaron, you said in the beginning that I'm calling from St. Paul and Minneapolis, and there's so much grief here. There is so much sadness over what happened with Dante Wright. And I think that so many people, especially women and women of color, we come to places and we might not always have the words for what we're feeling, but we know it, right? It's like, it's how we smell, it's what we're seeing, it's in our body. And I want people just to trust that if you are feeling things in your stomach, or if your voice, it feels like you can't speak because there are no words, like that's exactly the spirit that's moving you to do and make change. And you've done it. You've always done it in your life. You just have to think back about all those times. And I know so many people have these stories of times when you thought, I couldn't do it, and you did it. And not only did you do it for yourself, but you did it for so many people. And this moment is calling for you to do the same thing. So, step up, rise up, right? In this season of resurrection, rise up and meet this moment, because you are enough.
That's right.
Well, the first thing I did right was the day I started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize and hold on, hold on. If there's anything that I want to leave with, I think this is the moment for us to radically reimagine what is possible when people are able to fully embrace and operate in the space of their power, that we can create the kind of nation, the kind of world that we need. It will require us to be innovative. It will require us to shift the paradigm of how we've seen things in the past. It will shift. We would actually have to shift and know that the change starts with us. So I would just offer that as Black women and women of color on the front lines, we're creating new pathways of change. And we literally believe that we're on the precipice of really creating a new way of being, a new way that we can shift the political landscape. And so I'll just make that offer that please join with us, that this is something that we can do together, because we all deserve, don't we all deserve to live in a world that actually centers more than anything the love of humanity, that anything and everything that we're engaged in is for the purpose of advancing humanity.
Amen.
Thank you all. Thank you for allowing me in this space with all of you. Thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability always, and of course for these lessons, this masterclass, and for the Skoll World Forum. We are of course thrilled to have this platform, but we want many of you to use what you have heard, whether that is a self-reflection inside your company, running for office, understanding these levers of change, and doing it with the sort of the vision and song and love that you've just heard from all three of our speakers. And this really, what you're hearing, what you're feeling right now, this is the new way. This is the way forward. So thank you to all of you, to the Senator, to Latasha Brown, Paku Hang, and thank you to the Skoll World Forum for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.